Let's turn to John 7:7 just for a minute. John 7:17.
Are you going to read it?
I'll
You going to read it out?
let you read that. John 7:17, and we'll go right into our...
Bring my Bible. John 7:17,
Yeah.
eh? Is that one verse?
One verse.
If any man's will is to do his will, he shall know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own authority.
This is Jesus talking to...
Oh, yes. If any man's will is to do his will, he shall know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own authority. Jesus is speaking.
The golden rule for understanding and using this reference, if any man will do his will, he shall know whether it's the will of the Lord or his own. The golden rule for understanding in spiritual matters is not intellect, but obedience. If things are dark to us spiritually, it is because there is something we will not do. If things are dark to us spiritually, it is because there is something we will not do. Intellectual darkness comes because of ignorance. Spiritual darkness comes because of something I do not intend to obey. How's that for the thought for the day? Oswald Chambers. Sound familiar, huh? Spiritual darkness comes because of something I do not intend to obey.
That came up in our Sunday school lessons when I was teaching about Peter, walking on water. And the thought that came out, that I brought out in the lesson was, if for some reason or other you find an arid place in your spiritual life, nothing's happening, everything's the same. Why don't I have that excitement? Why don't I have, the thing is, have you taken that first step that Peter did to get over the side of the boat, the impossible first step? Has God been prompting you to take a step, and yet you just haven't done it? And as a result, everything's dry and arid, because God's already told you what to do, and you're not doing it.
You're saying, I don't understand his will. I don't understand.
But Jesus said, come. And we went.
And again, it's a change that you have to make.
Yeah.
Sitting back
Right.
waiting for people to do it for you,
Yeah.
it's not going to happen.
This is what I think 1 Corinthians 13 is all about with love. I don't think love is a feeling, as John Powell says. Love is an activity. Jesus says, love one another. That's something you do. It isn't something you feel. I think a lot of time, for a while there, I was praying to the Lord, give me the love for this one and give me the love for that one. What was I doing? Hopping out. I was saying, give me the love. I wasn't even going to step out the first step. Love is an activity, not a feeling. Love is something you do. Love bears all things, endures all things, believes all things.
Oh,
Love is not impatient.
Love is caring. And when you care, you do.
You do. When you don't do, you don't love. God is love, therefore love is an activity. So to love is to be doing something, and it makes you stop and think when you put love in this context. That's what brings you in here on a Sunday afternoon when it's sunny outside. You're doing something. It's easy to talk and be vocal about Christianity, but love is being there. Love is doing when it's not convenient. Love is doing when it's not popular. Love is doing when there's other things you'd rather. Love is an activity. And when you think of it in that area, it's something. He says, love one another as I've loved you. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And we spoke briefly last week about loving yourself. But love, I look at 1 Corinthians 13 now, and I've got it pasted up on the mirror in the bathroom, shaving in the morning. And I keep looking at it, and I keep seeing the word activity every time I look at that now. What is love? It's patience. It's kind. It bears all things. It goes right on down to what it is. It's not a feeling. It's probably why a lot of kids getting married today, they fall in and out of love like this. You know, it's like, well, I don't love her anymore. The feeling's gone. I don't love him anymore. The feeling is gone. They're looking at love as a feeling, and they're like on a racer deck, one of these things, up and down, up and down, up and down. But it's something you decide. Love is an activity. Love bears all things. What does she need me to be this day? What do I need her to be this day, in line with the two of us being married? Where's the support? When she was when she was going after the comps, when she went down for the degree, wherever she needed support, you were there. This is what I meant about the alcoholic. You know, you're there. So it's an activity, and I think that's comes along the line with what our friend Oswald Chambers had to say. Okay, well, let's get, so we don't lose too much time, let's go to depression. Turn to page 8. Okay, depression starts bottom of page 8 and goes over to actually the top of page 9. Anybody want to take a shot at what is depression?
I know what psychiatrists say.
Okay, what does psychiatrists say?
Anger turned in towards self.
Okay.
That's
Anger
very simplified.
turned in. Anything else?
Poor self-image.
Poor self-image.
Fear.
Fear. Anybody else? It's all those things. Webster calls it it's an act and a state. He calls it, depression is the act of depressing oneself, and it's a state of being depressed. So it's an act and a state. It's a dejection as of the mind. It's a loss of self-esteem. It's the inability to live. If you wrap it all around, for the anger, the fear, it's the inability to live up to one's own standards or self-concept. The inability to live up to one's standards or self-concept, as I see me, not as you see me, as I see me, as I think I should be. Yeah.
I think in that reference, I think perhaps a good example of that is the person who tends to be a perfectionist. Have a lot of problems.
He's his own worst enemy, or she's her own worst enemy. Perfection, and we know a few that go that route, and they are misery. They're taking pills. They can't find happiness. There's no contentment.
And I think what they're not looking at is it is their own choice, because they've set these standards, and it is through their own choice.
And it's a goal. They think of it. This is a goal, and I will accept nothing less. Well, the problem is that has an effect on them, and then the people around them, because they affect their
Pride
family.
is very much involved.
Very much so.
Sure.
Perfection.
Pride is
They're looking for perfection all the time, and they're not capable of
And it's
perfection.
impossible. Nobody can attain, perfect standards. So it's a false pride.
So then it's a form of self. You believe then depression is a form of self-punishment as a counselor. Self in the sense that you set a goal or a standard or a self-concept too high. That's something to remember when you're counseling people, because it's important to turn into not so much, they'll give you a lot of what they think about others, but it's important to direct the inquiry as to what they think of themselves, because that's where they got to start to search. Come in to find that maybe they got a set of standards a little too high, or their self-image is blown out completely. Their mother or their father or their husband or their wife said, you're no good, you're this, you're that. There's a constant put down. And from this, you get into a situation where you begin to withdraw. So as our friend John Powell and Contact says, John Powell says, most depressions are self-limiting, which he wrote in his book, Self-Limiting, and it's exactly that. There's no way he can come out of that. The fact is, it's a reversal. It's just back and back, a complete, total withdrawal. Depression is a form of despair, or destruction, emotion. Destruction, emotion that can be considered self-punishment. And Dr. William Glasser, he has the Gospel of Glasser in the book, that one of the recent books that I read, talks about personal worth. And he says, and you can make notes or whatever thoughts you might have. This was something he threw in about self-worth or personal worth, because this is the stepping stone toward depression and how to bring someone out of, or begin to make them understand where they are as far as their depression is concerned. Dr. Glasser says all psychological problems, from the slightest neuroses to the deepest psychoses, are symptomatic of the frustration of the fundamental human being's need for a sense of personal worth. Who are you? Are you satisfied with who you are? There's some who can't find out who they are. And there's a frustration that builds in. And it spreads from, as he mentions, the neurosis to a psychosis. It affects people depending on how much hassle they're getting around them. He says the self-image of any human being will be the radical determining factor of his or her life. People act and especially relate to other people in accordance with the way they think and feel about themselves. People act and relate to other people in relationship to the way they feel and think about themselves. I have an image of me, and I'm working in that image, and I'll act or relate from that basis. You do the same thing. We all do. We call it at times, we build little brick walls around us, facade, because part of the meaning of the book, Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am? If I show you who I really am, and you reject me, I'm dead, because I've got nothing else to show you. So I'll hide me. I'll put things up that you can't see. And I'll hope that what you see is attractive to you and you'll want to see me again, or you'll want to associate or be friendly with me. But if I show you the real me and you turn me off, then there's absolutely nothing I have left. I'm in total, completely despair. People act and especially relate to other people in accordance with the way they think and feel about themselves. So, Glasser calls these things such as depression, anger, insanity, and physical sickness, he calls them options. Options. And he terms options as attempted escapes from the pain of failure as a person, to the extent that we fail to perceive worth in ourselves, and we will retreat into one of these analgesic shelters. We will retreat. We withdraw. We will go into depression. We will go into anger. We can go into insanity. Or we can go into physical sickness itself. But they're options. Something we decide to do. Something we choose to do. So depression is one of 4 options that is brought about by the person because it's an attempted escape from the pain of failure. What is depression? We talked about depression is the loss of self-esteem, the inability to perceive worth in oneself. So then depression is the escape. It's one of the options in backing off, getting away from the hurt or the pain of failure. And it's a perceived failure. It's what I think is failure. You're not accepting me, so I'm a failure, so I back off. You don't accept me again, and I back off more. Until I get to such a point that I'm so deeply withdrawn into depression that it's a long trip back. He calls it an idler. For those of you who, I don't know whether to go this route or not. How many drove a car that had clutch?
As the kids say,
Okay,
"What's a running
that's
wheel?"
how old I am. Okay. Well, see, I remember grandmother told me about these when I was growing up. But that depression is the idler that keeps the engine of your mind from blowing completely out. You know, as it goes up and it's unable to cope.
Yeah, be careful. We have one now.
Yeah.
You got a clutch thing? Gee, can I look at your... How about that? But consider then depression as that idler, as that taking out of gear your life, You're moving along, you're coping, you're working, and all of a sudden it begins to get too much, so you take her out of gear, and it brings that depression is a form of idling that engine, slowing it down so it won't blow the engine up. It's kind of put, this one author says it's an abnormal state, and that's exactly what it is. Depression is a state of gloominess or sadness accompanied by tearfulness, appetite loss, sleep disturbance, and a lessening of motor activity. Depression is an abnormal state of gloominess or sadness accompanied by tears, appetite loss, sleep disturbance, and a lessening of motor activity. Know anybody with those symptoms?
Yeah, the loss, didn't they? Loss of appetite. Had one living with me.
Yeah,
Years.
I was like that.
Okay. And that's withdrawal. It's truly an option, an attempted escape through the one form, as I mentioned. And this can go into its depression, anger turned in, as you mentioned, insanity, which is just totally complete withdrawal, and or physical sickness. And a lot of the physical sicknesses today are just that, brought about by the backing off.
I went down 170 pounds from 230.
Mm-hmm.
How long did that period last?
A couple months. Yeah, 7 months.
Now there's a solution. We have it in your notes. The symptoms of depression are 3, as it's shown in the bottom of page 8. Negative opinion of self, convinced they cannot cope, the world's too much, withdrawal from work and recreation. The solution? Well, for us, it's shown in 2 Corinthians 4, 7, and 8. 2 Corinthians 4, 7, and 8. Anybody want to read that? Anybody have it open? 2 Corinthians. All right, let me do it. I have it do it while you're writing. I can, because I've written it out. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels to show the transcendent power, to show that the transcendent power belongs to God and not to us. We have this treasure in earthen vessels to show the transcendent power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. Despair is another way of saying depression. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For while we live, we are always being given up to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life is in you, he said. I use this as a biblical solution for Christians and for those that you're leading to Christ. The solution for depression is the step-by-step return, and it's on the bottom of the page. It's the depressed people must be put on a schedule. As you withdraw, you go back and back and back to where some of them do absolutely nothing. Fact is, we talk on the phone to some of them. It's a task to get them out of bed. And one morning, Jean told one of them, well, the person who was depressed, take a shower. Step 1. Just get out of the bed and take a shower. First step. And then do one thing and then do the second. There must be a return. But that self-worth has also got to come out in your counseling. What is that person? Before you can start back, there has to be first going back in and into their lives. And this is where healing of the memories, when you're with Richard on the Friday night, that you reach all the way back and you begin to find out the real reason why that person's self-worth is zilch. And you start back, then this would be the steps that you might suggest. That it took them a step-by-step regression, and it'll take the same step-by-step approach to come back out again, one at a time. Any thought?
I think this is why one of the greatest gifts in the world is to other people is when you accept them for themselves without judging what they are, that, you don't have to condone what they're doing, like the drinking. But as Jack was saying before, when you open up to show someone what you are and they reject it, you have no place else to go. You have no place to hide. And to say, I accept you as a human being, as someone that God loves. Now you've got a bad behavior problem, and if you're ready, then we'll work on that. And I think this is God's greatest gift.
You're really going to get involved with people when you start moving into what makes people tick, and you start working into some of the. Well, it's already happened to each of you as a counselor. You've hooked into a person who began to talk to you, and the next thing you know, it goes into a deep return to the hurts that they've experienced from family or mother, father, husband, wife, whatever it may be, and it goes back, and it's wow. You just couldn't believe something like that could happen to one individual in a short span of time. A young person or someone could have that much of a hassle in their life. But once you walk back with them, you're committed, because they need that ventilation. They need that talking about, well, I never told that to anybody before. So you can't express shock, or concern. They may tell you something that will really make the hair go up. But it's that total acceptance, that total, okay, let's keep it coming, keep it going. And going back in that whatever the reasons may be, it's necessary for them to go all the way back to that point of pain, which we talked about.
Speaking of shock, it's one thing I learned very quickly: never be shocked at anything. I learned to keep a poker face very early in this game, and when I really was shocked, and I realized that you and most of us here have led a sheltered life.
Yes.
Very much so.
We haven't been into
Very
it.
much so.
And a lot of those people, they have a reason, to feel and be the way that they are. But to live a happy, healthy life, you've got to do something other, than, even though you have a reason. There are ways that you can handle these things. There is never just one solution. This is the thing when we get into suicidal calls that we get. And they're thinking, this is it. This is my only way out. This is my only way to handle a situation. It's the same thing with other people. As you're counseling with them, there's always another way. You just have to help explore to determine what, but it has to come from them. Because it's as with some of the phone calls that we get, you could offer 100 different solutions that sound perfectly logical to you, and they're saying, no, that's not it, that's not it. They're picking and choosing, So that's why it's important to involve the people. They've got to make some effort themselves, on anything, because they know better than you, what's going on in their life.
In other words, they answer their own questions.
That's right, and what you're doing is you're helping them perhaps take logical steps, of how to get from one place to another.
So we'll move into suicide now, but before we do, does everybody have a feeling now of what depression is? It's an anger, to be sure, and it's a fear. Do you have a new idea or a new approach now to just what the makeup is? That it goes right back to the individual's self-worth, the inability of them to live up. It can be a high set of standards, it could be perfection, it could be something they were told they should be. Whatever it is, that was the thing that started to drive them back. What needs to be done is the coming forward to bring them back out into reality again. But that doesn't happen until their self-worth changes.
That's true, because perhaps the person is trying to live up to someone else's standards.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying, oh, well, I just get harangued all the time, because I don't keep a clean house, or I don't mow the lawn, or whatever.
You should do this, you should. You ever heard of the shoulds? Anybody know anything about transactional analysis?
Yeah.
You should do this, you should do that. And it'll drive you bananas.
Sure, you don't
I'm
have to do
I'm playing the parent tapes. I still hear my mother.
Yeah.
In my mind, I'll do something. It's amazing. And I'll have a facial expression on my face and I can feel it. That's my mother. This thing must have been taped umpteen years ago. But I'm saying something where I'm reacting to a parent tape. I've been taped. In my first 5 years, I got all the shoulds and should nots. And they went in there, And I function from, how many have listened or know what transactional analysis is? The parent state, the ego state, the child state. We all basically, and I'll just touch it for a moment, we all function in three various states in our ego. We have a possibility of an adult state, a parent state, and a child state. And there are times when I'll revert to my child state. I'll do things that are childish, or I'll act like a child. I'll want, give me this, give me that, or I'll pout, or I'll do something. I'm working from my child state. But most of the time, I'm functioning from a parent state because I've been programmed from age 1 through age zilch, 1 through whenever I started to listen to the symbol of words. My mother says, you can do this, you can do that, but you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't feel this because boys shouldn't feel that way, or you shouldn't do this because girls shouldn't feel that way. There's all the shoulds, you know. And you carry this on into adult life with you. Now, as I heard this put, we can function in these three states every minute of every day. The adult state is not a fun state. That's an evaluation state. The adult state that I'm in is one where I look at what I'm saying or look at what I'm doing and deciding whether I really want to, do I really want to behave this way?
It's logical. Yeah.
Logical evaluation of what I'm doing or what I'm about to do. So I'm functioning from an adult state. If I go off and do what my mother told me to do umpteen years ago, I'm operating from the parent state. Do this, do that, do this, do that. And it's functioning from a parent state. If I get a little pouty or get a little acting up like a child, then I'm functioning from a child state. Now we can, as Dr. Robertson said up in Reading, he's a minister in Reading, he says, you have fun from your child state. As an adult, you can't have fun from an adult state. It's when you...
It's always analyzing.
It's always
yeah.
analyzing, you're looking at it. So when you go to have fun, you really return to you've heard yourself say, well, I'm in my second childhood, or I'm doing something that, gee, this is fun. I haven't done this since way back when. But this is fun. I'm in my child state when I'm functioning. Or if I get to start getting a little rough with people, and I want my own way, and I want things the way I want it, when I want it, how I want it.
It's a rebellious kid.
It's a rebellious kid. I'm working from my child
Yeah.
state.
Yeah.
So I've either got to think in terms that I'm functioning from tapes that my mother and my father put in me, or from the child state. And so I now that I see these three states, I begin to think in terms of or evaluating my behavior. As Mr. Oswald Chambers, I'm looking, deciding what I'm going to do. And the things that I do have to do with what I mentioned about love. Love is doing something. So love means being there. Love means doing what I'm commanded to do. This is a whole book of things to do. And there's no question about what has to be done. So it's just a matter of when you open this up and you read it, you can say, well, I want to know the will of God. The will of God is in there. It tells you exactly what you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to do. Now, for a long time, I prayed, Lord, give me the power to love that guy across the street. Give me the power to love that guy down such and such, or this guy that I work with. And I wanted it done for me, right? You see, this point, I'm waiting for him to come down and take my will out and say, okay, Jack, here's the power to do it. When I look at the will of God and the decision to take the first step, as Oscar said over the boat, the decision to, I'm going to take the first step toward this guy to love him. Okay, now I'm doing the Father's will. Then comes the support of the power of the name of Jesus Christ. So what we do from a child state or a parent state or an adult state, it's a decision. I can see now where the Bible keeps telling us, take heed, watch what you're doing, watch where you are, watch what you say, watch your actions, because you're responsible as a Christian for everything you do and say. So if you're quick to shoot the mouth off, you stop and you think twice about what you're going to say. Is it going to hurt? Is it going to help? If it's going to hurt, shut up. Don't bother to say it. How many times do you forgive? 7 times 7. You want to measure 490. I can never forget Jean. She says, I'm going to forgive that person 490 times, and then I'm going to deck them. That way she's complied with the law. You see,
1
she's
year and
complied.
so many days I had the whole thing figured out.
Figured out. He was going to get it right after
490
490 times. He was going
Ow.
to deck you. But she was complying with the law, right? He said I said, honey, you've got to figure by the time you reach 490, something's
right.
got to have changed.
See, again, that's 490 days. That is a tremendous habit chain
time,
that
yeah.
you've built.
By the time you reach that,
Right.
by the time you have forgiven
That's right.
490 times,
That's right.
you're ready for the 491st time. There's no
Exactly.
decade, to be sure.
Yeah.
As I understand it, in those days, that particular phrase meant, forever.
Forever.
Yeah,
Right,
True.
it-
Just
sure,
right.
right, sure,
True.
because that's what's operating, you
Right.
know. Each day you forge a stronger, another chain, in link in this chain of behavior.
In depression, at the top of page 9, in
Jack,
depression.
could I
Yeah.
just make a comment here? They were saying about the child state. It made me think. Perhaps there is Jesus' insight into how we live our Christian life. Except you be as a little child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. You know, the fun in life comes
Yes.
approaching it as a child.
Not as a child.
Not
Not
childish,
childish,
Yeah, that's
but
right.
childlike. Not
Yeah.
childish, but
Yeah.
childlike.
Right.
Because you teach Sunday school today to these kids that are coming in that are in 6 and 7, 8, 9 years old, and they just, whatever you say, that's it. It's just total belief. You hear the little girl that goes over and touches her mother and prays, Lord, please heal. And they're touched to heal. There's just no doubt in her mind. That's if you had the grain of a mustard seed. She reaches out and she's expecting an answer. There's no question. She was told there would be an answer. And she's looking for it. And she gets it. Or he gets it. But we're so backed up with tapes and, well, let me see a sign or show me a little proof first or, when we get through the prayer, we forget what it's all about, man. I keep thinking of Peter when he reached at the gate beautiful, when he reached over for the guy and picked him up and he said, I have nothing but silver or gold, I have none, but I'll give you what I do have. And he reached over and pulled the guy up and, well, he'd already learned a lesson stepping out of that boat. He'd already had his moment of, Peter had his moment of doubt.
Well, that was the first step. He took
Yeah.
a few tumbles.
He took a few tumbles, but he finally reached out and said, okay, I'm going to quit it. I'm going to quit doubting now. I'm going to pray and expect answers. Questions to ask on the top of page 9. These are, how are you sleeping? How's your appetite? Have you had a recent illness? Have you talked to your doctor about your emotions? Are you taking any medications? All these could lead you back to self, the perception of their self-concept. So there are questions you might keep in mind or when you're talking with people who are
Yeah, because sometimes
Or
they're
depression.
talking to you and they say, I don't know what's wrong with me.
I really don't.
And then in trying to
Supply.
draw them out, they know that. So these are questions that you can ask them, and they're like little guidelines.
We want to.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead. In suicides, and I don't think, have we had any cases on Friday night of suicides? Or
Have you
people,
had people come in
people
up
come in and saying, I'm going to
this
kill
is what
myself.
I feel like doing?
I feel like killing myself.
Have you?
Okay. Well then, one. Anybody else?
Yeah.
You've had one. All right. Then, there's not too much. Our training, they have suicide prevention in the city of Philadelphia. We get suicide callers, and when we get them, our whole impression on the phone is, of course, to try to maintain a contact while we're trying, and this is through conversation only. Eyeball to eyeball, you got a different situation. I think what you're getting is people who've said, I'm considering suicide. Okay, with suicide, I think in page 9 you see the suicidal callers. So this does not imply those with eyeball to eyeball, where these are callers. We can get those in the midst of an attempt, those who are planning it, and those who have continued thoughts. Somebody will call in and say, I'm frightened, I keep thinking about suicide. Or someone will say, well, I'm seriously planning suicide. Or you'll get a call from somebody saying, I'm taking an overdose and I want you to talk to me while I die. So we've got 3 types that can call us. Those who are in the act, in the midst of an attempt. That's number 1. And they are chronic attempters, and we have them, they'll do this once a week. And then the cops got to go up, and we got by the time you get the cops in there and the ambos and everything, and then you get them back and pump out their stomach and
But they are asking for something.
Right.
They're asking for help.
if they wanted to die, they wouldn't have dialed the phone. I think it was Marilyn Monroe, they said, was reaching. Who was it that was dead when they found the phone off the hook?
Yes.
So a lot of times, I think they make the effort, they make the attempt, and then they change their mind, and they reach to the phone for help, and they've miscued. It's too late. So I won't go over these other than everything the chronic attempters, very little trouble getting information from these people because they're, usually when they call you in the midst of an attempt, they either got to be, I've done something and I need help. So they'll tell you who they are, they'll tell you where they live, you got a telephone number, you got everything else. You can get the cops on the other phone just like that. You can get and suicide prevention on there at the same time. The one that really bugs me is the one that, and I haven't gotten one like that yet, said, I've taken an overdose, now I'd like you to talk to me while I'm dying. And that's the one that's just cold turkey.
That's right.
I
So
said,
no
no
way.
way.
Yeah.
No way. You've made that decision, and I'm
a
ready.
human
I'm here to
being,
help you, but
and
I'm
I
not
don't
about-
have to live through this with you. If
Right.
you, because the anger, they're trying to make you pay for their anger at someone else. So it's, it is,
Crazy.
yeah, it is just something that, as I say, what we've been instructed on these is to say, I am a human being and I choose not, and this person, the example that we were given, and they said, well, that's your function, you're there to listen. And they said, no, so if you want help, you give me your name, your phone number, and we'll get someone there to help you. But no way am I going to, sit on the
there and
telephone
talk to you
and talk to you
while you perish.
while you die. Because that's the thing they keep stressing, is to remember that they're trying to get some reaction out of you because they haven't been able to change someone else,
And other times this could be a fake too, with the number of calls, because
they've
you
done
get
that.
prank calls that
Yeah.
do this every once in a
But-
while, just to see if they can shake
They
somebody
really
up.
do. These
What do
people
you
are sick in
usually
a
do
different
in a
way.
case like that? Hang up and trace the call?
Or try.
No,
Well,
no, you.
we ask for the number.
Yeah,
We'll
if
say
they
we're
won't
here
give
to
you
help
the
you.
number, then, once you hang up, the connection's broken. And generally at night, it is more difficult to trace the call because some of these substations are locked and they can't even, get into
Take
trace.
something like, they can trace in the daytime
They
hours, they can do it in
faster.
20 minutes, but at night, there's no way they can trace a call after the
Right,
main
and
office is closed
right,
down
and
on
sometimes
Sunday.
it's impossible.
And it's 24-hour
So,
service.
And it could be that people are doing this for an attention, and it's misinformation they have, and they're paying with their life. See, and that's the thing that they keep stressing with a suicide. The ultimate decision is theirs, and in no way are you responsible for it.
Suicide prevention is all
Because
that
these
they
people
put
are
up.
responsible in the final analysis for their own lives, and if this is their choice, so that we have been trained, and they keep stressing about feeling guilt. And I think this was one of the conversations that Rose Holland was talking about with this person. Then she said, I felt like I had to do something. And this is a tremendous burden you're placing on yourself, and it's wrong, that you should not be doing that, and that's the same
Find
thing.
God, really.
Right.
Right,
That's true.
but you see, it doing it that way, you're saying, you're in essence saying, well, it's showing that I'm caring, so that you're approaching it in a way that puts a different light on it, and yet it's still wrong, because ultimately we just can't control other people. So, and it, yeah.
As a Christian,
mhm.
we're talking of a slightly different.
Right.
Well, we're talking,
we're talking about
Christians.
telephone callers.
We're still
I
Christians.
I
Yeah.
would feel as
Yeah.
a Christian,
Yeah.
and especially if that person was in the last moments of his or her life,
Yes.
I would feel obliged to question them about Christ and eternal life,
Yes.
because I would feel also that he had gone that far and
Well, you-
done what
yeah,
he had
yeah.
done.
Well, this is over
We
the
said,
phone.
all right, this is his decision.
Oh, yes,
What has
yes,
caused him
yes.
to do that?
Well, most of the
Yeah.
time, we're talking about somebody who has taken an overdose.
Yeah.
By the time, if you can talk to them, usually by the time and I say I haven't experienced one of these, I would be in prayer, heavy prayer at that particular point. Hopefully, of first getting their name. The one thing they tell us to do is get the name and the address or the telephone number so we can get help to them.
Well, after you've done that,
In lieu of that, all you can do is pray for them then.
Yeah, no,
They've reached
this
that
is
particular
as
point.
if you're hanging up the phone on them.
So you're still going to try to maintain some
carry
kind of
through on the
contact.
procedure.
of trying to get to them. You might be able to talk one of them out of it, or they reach a point where they
Well, it
realize,
shocks them out of it
you're dying.
sometimes.
Hey man, you've only got so many minutes,
That's
and
right.
this is it.
Yeah.
You're not going to make any more any phone calls after this.
And once they know that you're not going to listen, then they're willing sometimes to talk.
Yeah.
You know, as I said, I didn't continue on with the procedure.
But this
and,
is, you see why contact comes this way? That was one of the biggest fears after 60 hours of training. Most every trainee feared the suicide call. Because you can get all kind of calls and you've got dialogue that's going to continue. But the suicide, man, everybody sort of backed up. So that when the suicide prevention came in, he said, when the team came in to teach it, they said, now let's start right from the top. We want you to take the call. We want you to try to get as much information as you can, but you're not responsible for what happens. And they had to do this because there was a lot of trainees that were ready to walk out. They said, well, I can take up to here, but at this point, I'm not going to handle a suicide. I got no way of coping with that.
and you don't know when you pick up the phone
Right.
what call
That you
it's
got
going
her.
to be.
So,
you know?
and the suicides and this isn't the case like, even if someone shoots themselves, then after they've shot themselves, they want help. It's the overdose, the drug overdose, and the effects of overdose drug. You usually got a guy or a gal that's way up high. As they say, they're on a trip. By the time they get there, they're saying, you can't even talk to them with any degree of logic. You're saying, give me your number, give me your name, I'll get help to you. And hopeful that you can get through there. But
Well, this
It hasn't,
might be parallel to, say, Friday night. I mean, this is...
well, I think Friday night goes with 2 and 3 more than anything else. Someone who says to
Yeah.
you they're planning suicide, or 3, that they're frightened by continuing thoughts of suicide. In 2, people who are planning, you're going to have, or questions like, how long have you felt this way? Have you tried before? Is there a method, have you, and we were asked, what are your plans to get
Sure,
some
and
idea,
some of
get them to
have thought
verbalize?
it through.
Because they may
know
have thought it through and
exactly.
say, well, I bought a rope, or I bought a gun, or I bought such and such. How far along are they? What is your plan? Where are you? You're just talking it in your mind, or have you done something concrete about it? Get them to respond. And then, about that time, you're talking about suicide
That's the
prevention.
one
You
that-
want them
yeah,
to talk with
The
that.
one that has a complete plan
Right.
has perhaps taken that step closer to the actual act.
It was a story told about the guy who had driven a car. Had he driven a car? He was out west, and his family, they had an accident, and the whole family was wiped out.
Yes.
And he survived. And he was cool as a cucumber. He arranged for all the funerals, and everything was taken care of, and then he killed himself. Cold turkey. He planned it. There was just no question about it. He felt total responsibility. I said, well, that was depression. He didn't have time for depression. This was just total, complete. Everything had come to an end. There was nothing more. He wasn't going to rebuild. But he was cool as a cucumber during this taking care of the funerals and the family and the money and the insurance, and everything was set. When everything was finished.
May I ask this, Jack?
Mhm.
We had a girl we took into witness for 8 years, and the whole 8 years we had her, she was under psychiatric care and in depression the whole time. But she was a manic depressive. She'd go way up and way down.
That's extreme.
And
Well, sometimes that's chemical,
Yes,
not
I know.
not
it is.
emotion,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
And we always felt that when she threatened suicide, and once she did, we had to
Yeah.
rush her to the hospital at 5 in the morning and have her stomach pump. That a lot of this was attention getting.
Yes, it can be.
Right.
Yeah.
And she didn't really want to take her life because
Yeah.
the minute she does it, then she pulls for help.
Right, yeah.
Or the slicing of the wrist is the same thing.
Yeah.
They never go deep enough that it's fatal, but it's enough that it causes a great deal of panic and rushing off.
Well, it's
And-
their
We
way of
almost felt
handling.
it was self-enjoy.
Yeah, sure. It's their
Attention.
way of handling their life, and so that it can be a problem. And as number 3 said, almost everyone has had thoughts of suicide because the last sentence, many feel dying is easy, and living is the hard part. See, that we talk about happiness, how to explore ways of being happy, how to be self-fulfilled, how to be, help to others. The ultimate self-actualization, to be oneself. And that's very hard at times. There's so many things that are within our lives, that it's not going to suit us. We're not going to get people to change simply because of our standards, so this is, as I said, some of the people that I've talked to over the telephone, I can understand what you're saying, and they run out this string of horrendous experiences, you know. And of course, you know, if I think, putting myself in that situation, boy, no wonder they're thinking of you know, leaving, taking their life or something. Anybody, it's a natural reaction. You want to get away from it.
I knew somebody who tried to commit suicide at least 4 or 5 times, I'm not sure. And the last time, she did it in Abington Hospital, so it was right there on the
Yes.
spot.
Right.
Yes. Where she could get an immediately emergency.
Well, explore in 3, when someone says they're frightened by continuing thoughts, there's a great deal of prayer needed here. It's the assurance first that almost everyone has thoughts of suicide at one time or another in their life, even if it's just a case that you're considering the possibility. But B, you use the word, context says explore when such thoughts occur. That's the key. Circle the word when. Because a lot of times, with thoughts of suicide may just follow a family battle, an argument with husband, wife, an argument with mother, father. There may be a particular time sequential that keeps repeating. When does that happen? And by bringing that out, you say, oh, yes, it follows a sequence of events that causes or creates this thought. What has happened to cause him to feel depression, and why does he feel it would be a solution? Because suicide's kind of like, as whenever I'm talking with and I've had this on the phone with someone who says, well, I'm considering suicide. I said, that's pretty final, man. There's no, you know, you don't dial the phone and call back after you do that. That's it. You wrapped it all up. So there's got to be another way. Why do you figure this is a solution? And it makes them verbalize. It makes them say, well, then I wouldn't have to blank blank. When they say that, well, that sounds pretty drastic, you know, because there's no chance of coming back after that. So explore that possibility, and especially with the emphasis on when. Okay? On page 10, for listeners, we're told to be resourceful, courageous, and I like 3. You must have a gambler's instinct. You want to convince the caller to take a chance on life, sway them in a positive direction. And they said this in training, and we talk about being riverboat gamblers, you know, and this is what happens when you climb up on the top of a bridge, where you see cops and priests ministers up on the top of buildings to keep a guy from jumping. It's kind of a riverboat effect. But the problem-solving approach defines the problem, what can be done about it, motivation or suggestions, and activate. You're getting them to take them back into what it is and what the options are that they have, that this one that they're considering is kind of final. There's got to be another way, and motivate them to that. Make them doubt their sadness, their negativism, and bring them around to a more positive approach. The facts on suicide are on page 11, and these are just for your own information. 90% of the suicides, the most common symptom is depression. I circled that one. Page 12 has to do with the clues to suicide. And they're important. Depression is right off the top. Threats of suicide. Indirect comments, I'm at the end of my rope. When they stop talking, withdrawal, changes in sleeping or eating habits, constant thoughts of death, vague physical complaints, or giving away valued possessions. Preparing for giving away valued possessions, that's a plan. When they get to that stage, they're considering it. They bought the gun, the rope, the what. They're getting ready, they're setting it up. That's what this guy did, that the family was wiped out. He prepared everything. Everything was all set. And methods, guns, drugs, hanging, and others. Suggested guidelines, you can read those, and most of you have been given that second page. Helen, did you get the second section? Because the suggested guidelines when taking calls on page 12 are continued in the second piece that I gave you, 13. I won't go over them, but if there's questions you might be interested in asking someone there, they're at the bottom. They begin at the bottom of page 13. Do you feel confused? Why do you feel confused? And they're continued on 14. Are you depressed? Number 2, are you depressed? How long have you felt? 3 is, are you ill in any way? 4, what groups do you belong to? Do you care less about doing the things you used to enjoy? They're questions that turn the people in. So you can read these rather than take the time now, because I want to go into the next session, the next part of death and dying. Does it seem like you're always failing? Are you in financial trouble? Does it seem sometimes that you get more than your share of the bad breaks? How do you sleep? Have you noticed any change in sexual desires? Have you difficulty eating? How old are you? Are you over or under 60? Do you feel are you seriously suicidal at this moment? What kind of moral feeling do you have? So the question's designed to turn that individual in. Now you can look at that, and those that you feel comfortable with, circle or put on a 3x5 card and keep it with you on Friday night. What you will need on Friday is like a little reference maybe that you can keep in a pocketbook or keep in a coat pocket. Just a key phrase of something. You say, well, we talked about suicide. So somebody says, I get thoughts of suicide all the time. And you think, oh, gee, what was that thing Jack said about suicide? Or what was that course on? What did it say? And you might want to just put a couple of key questions and just use it as a reference sheet that you can refer to. Any questions concerning suicide? Any thoughts? Comments? Okay. Well, then let's move on into
16.
Page 15 is more comment. That's, yeah, we need 16. Top of page 16. 16 and 17 and, yeah, 16, 17 and the top part of 18. 16, 17 have to do with death and dying. Anybody read Dr. Kubler-Ross's book on death and dying? Dr. Kubler-Ross on death or dying. Are you getting any?
Does neither one have the condensation in Reader's Digest?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, but I did read it.
Okay.
Yeah, I read that.
Psalm 23:4. Take some scripture at this particular point. Anybody know the 23rd Psalm by heart? And do they remember verse 4? Shadow of death. Okay. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. On Friday night, when you're talking of death and dying, you're talking to someone who has a problem. Either they've lost someone, a loved one, or they are a terminally ill person who is facing death themselves. Right? You've had them. They face death themselves, or they're facing the stages of death that has come as a direct result of a lost loved one. So Psalm 23:4 is one reference to make or to apply when you're speaking to someone from this category. Psalm 89:48 is another. Psalm 89 verse 48 says, "What man can live and never see death? Who can deliver his soul from the power of Sheol?" But the real key is 48. What man can live and never see death? We have a tendency to hide death or not want to talk about it. How many feel free about talking about that? Christian's wonderful.
I'm too young to talk about it.
Psalm 89:48 if you're marking the reference. Psalm 116:15 is another reference. Too young, you say, right, Joe?
Yeah, I got you, Jack. Look at
You never know, buddy.
her. Tomorrow, no.
116 verse 15 says, "Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints." Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. I never read that one before, did you?
No, I like that.
That's my favorite song.
Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. No wonder Norma Carson keeps wanting to graduate. She's been reading Psalm 116. 116 verse 15. Okay, questions to ask yourself. And these are right at the top of the page. These are straight off the notes. What are their fears? What are their hopes? And what is their unfinished business? And that's what contact means, unfinished business. We're going to get to the stages of death and dying. But it's important to know where a person's coming from when they come forward and they say, well, I've been told I've got X number of months to live, or I've been told that I have a terminal illness, or whatever the case may be, insofar as it concerns themselves, and or the death of a loved one. But we'll talk in terms of the people who are coming at you where they face death. And what are some of the things that the dying may be afraid of? And primarily it's the fear of death. Hebrews 2, 14, 15. Hebrews 2. Talking about the fear of death. Hebrews 2, 14, 15. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same nature, that through death he might destroy him who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong bondage. So keep that as a reference when you're talking, not only for yourself, but for people that you're talking about that have a fear of death. He himself likewise partook of the same nature, that through death he might destroy him who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who through the fear of death were subject to lifelong bondage. And there is a heavy fear of death in the world today. And this is what contact taught us from, you begin from there. And when you're talking with people, it is that fear. What comes after death? The actual event. The ceasing to be or non-existence. The incompleteness of their life. I'm not finished. I got a lot of life to live yet. Leaving behind all that they love. The dying process. Will it be painful? How long will it take? Will I be isolated or abandoned? Will I lose my identity, my and individual identity and dignity? And will I become emotional and financial burden on those I love? These are all the fears, not just the fear of leaving or the fear of dying, the fear that what happens afterwards. And these are very heavy, real fears. So prayer, but counseling, to verbalize, to get them to speak of it. Any questions on what is the fear of death and how it? I think we all know. Well, I myself, for a while there, before I found the Lord, I didn't talk too much about death. I think during the war, I always thought there was a possibility of getting it, and after a while, when you're that close to it, you figure, well, it's there, so it's going to happen. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. But afterwards, I never really I never got into conversation involving death. I just thought it was a period of time when it ended, and beyond that, that's it. I ceased to be. So in finding the Lord and reading what it means to be of the Spirit, an image of my Father, I realize now, and we got in a real beautiful conversation, I don't want to get too far off base, with a Jewish woman last night, Jewish gal last night, about death and the world beyond, and her in speaking of afterlife. And she's about as close as you can come to being a completed Jew. In fact, as she was citing scripture from the New Testament to such a point, I said, Iris, how would you like to teach my Sunday school class tomorrow? But there are Jewish people who, for them, death is the end of the line. There's nothing beyond. And you got to figure where they're coming from. When death is the end of the line, then it's all has to, which explains eloquently some of the actions that are going on in the world today with people who think just that.
But they know the prophets were with God, don't they, Jewish people?
Well, I mentioned to Iris that when God came to Moses in the burning bush, he said, I am the God of your fathers. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, And Jacob, and I said, Iris, he said, I am. He didn't say I was. I said, wouldn't that imply that Abraham lived? And she says, I never thought of that. I am the God. He didn't say I was the God. But Iris is different. She's well far, yeah, as I say, she's very close to being a completed Jew, but a lot of Jews,
Bring her
Jewish
Tuesday
friends
night.
just, huh?
Bring her
Yeah.
Tuesday night.
That would be good.
Yeah,
I
she'd
hadn't
have a
thought about
ball.
that.
We might ask
Yeah.
her to come out. That would be great.
We
But
had,
she,
yeah, we really did on this subject of death and dying. We had quite a conversation, and she said she is alone. That there
She's
is
single.
no one. Yeah,
Yeah,
right,
she's a single
not
girl.
married, and just no close person. And I thought, and she talks about a spirit. She says there is a spirit, and we are
Spirit
not
of God.
alone. And I kept saying, yeah.
Go, Iris, go.
That's Jesus.
Go, Iris. Well, she gets a little uncomfortable when you
I
say
mean,
Jesus. You know,
yeah.
she'll quote from the
Right,
New Testament.
right.
And I'll say his, him. She says, who's his? Who's him? You know, she'll question you. And I say, well, that's the Lord. That's where I'm coming from. And so when you get to death, and you're talking of when Joe Chudnoff's mother died down here at Murray's in Bitterwood, he said she died alone. And to die alone, and to die, realize, no family or friends. Imagine the last thoughts when a person expires.
This
and it's
thought
just
does
nothing.
haunt him.
And
He
this
feels that
causes-
he's failed in some way. She was in a nursing home, and she was alone.
And she was alone. There was no one there to. So there is a need to realize that there is a fear, and you're coming from a point where you don't have the fear. For you, death isn't the end; it's the beginning. But for the non-Christian or the unbeliever, it's heavy. So you must be sensitive to that fact. You can say, well, you're a Christian. You're supposed to be. Let me ask you this. If there's a fear of death, is the person a Christian?
Not really.
So that's where you're coming from in counseling. If there's a fear, it's not you should this or you should that. Let's draw along and go back to what Jesus promised, what Jesus said in Psalm, what God teaches us in Psalm and what Hebrew 2 tells us. So to draw out that fear, because if there's a fear, then there's an unbelief. So the counseling has to be in that particular area, and especially with a terminally ill person. Time is of the essence. It's getting time to fish in the thing.
I just read a book this week called Life After Life. It's a study that a doctor did on people who had been clinically dead and come back to life. About 150 cases. And there was one leading statement in there, I think it's apropos to what we're saying. He said in many cases he talked to, there always was a sense of being after death, a sense of light, a sense sometimes of meeting someone, going into a freer, more open, more complete world, except in the case of suicides, attempted suicide. In all those cases, there was a blackness, a void, a rejection, and he made note of that. And I thought that was interesting. But he said, 150 cases doesn't prove anything, but he just took it up as a study to delve into it. And you've read probably in the recent months some articles on that.
Yeah,
People have become interested in that area.
right. It's more and more that people are willing to talk about it.
So section 1 are some of the things they may be afraid of. Part 2 is what are some of the hopes of the dying? That they'll get well and productive again. Tomorrow will be a better day. They'll not be a burden. That their dying will not be painful or prolonged. Their families will be able to carry on without them. They will die with dignity, surrounded by those they love. That they will be reunited in death with their loved ones who have gone before them. These are the hopes of the dying. You see what we're doing here, what Contact's done for us and what we're doing here is to put you in a frame of reference to where people who face death are coming from. Some of their fears, some of their hopes. They're genuine, they're for real. They need the prayer. They also need you to understand who they are. What is unfinished business? And there is unfinished business for someone who faces death. Seeing a child's far away, taking a trip to Europe, completing an unfinished book, making out a will, making peace with God. cementing their relationship by communicating their true feelings to those they love, and talking about their fears of death. And it's important. It's important that they finish that business, that unfinished business. So you go into that. It's important that they think about it. Because many times, someone can become resigned to death and die. But if they've got unfinished business and they get to cracking to do that unfinished business, they'll live beyond the time. They get a positive approach. They think, well, I'm not going to go just yet. I got things I got to do. I got to do see that. And the next thing you know, a person was given 6 months to live may last 10 years. May last, may still be alive today. The total healing of the Lord. We don't know why or the whens, but it's important that they keep looking beyond that. That this isn't the end of the line. Okay, I'm going to stop living. I've been told I'm going to die, therefore I'm going to stop. This says unfinished business. Stress it, because it tends to give the life more meaning, impetus, reason for going on.
It gives them a goal, so to speak.
Exactly. And takes their mind off the fact that they face a terminal illness.
Feed that subconscious is very powerful.
How can we help? At the bottom of the page, 18 or 16. By confronting our anxieties, fears, beliefs regarding our own death and physical mortality in order to raise our death and dying consciousness. Kubler-Ross says that, quote, those people who have truly faced their own finiteness will be much better equipped to help dying patients. End of quote.
John, this I think is very important for some reason. I find myself meeting more with people who are coming for prayer because of a loved one that's dying. And this is what they have to do.
That's true.
I don't know about the rest of you, but
That's
it's
true.
too often that I've prayed with someone that's actually dying.
Yeah.
Or terminally
It's
ill.
more someone that comes and
Who
says,
knows?
my husband is terminally ill, or my sister, or my mother, or something like that.
Okay.
And I
And
think
then-
they need to
Yeah.
be aware of
You
how
help
they
them
feel.
explore their feelings,
Right.
about their own finiteness or, the time that they have. Because then possibly if you help them see something, then they in turn can help the other person.
Right.
Well, then these could be suggestions then on steps 1 through 5, 1 through 6 actually.
Right, for yourself.
The steps for yourself or the steps for the person you're counseling.
Absolutely.
Confronting their own anxieties. 2, by becoming comfortable with our feelings and minimizing the strangeness of death so that we're able to talk about it. I think that's what really trips up people more than anything else. Let's not talk about it.
Sure, how many
And they
times
wanna
people say,
talk.
I don't want to think about it. Well, that's, that's okay if that's your only defense. But then it is, why? Why don't you want to think about it? What is it that frightens you? Because we were doing a course in death and dying from the Christian perspective, and this was it. There is a loss, that you're not going to be there with your family. The people who are left are the ones who have to struggle with this feeling, but there's greater things for us. It's one of the promises, So, and I think many times that people who have hang-ups about that say, I'm a Christian, but they don't read the Bible. And I used to do that, that I would say, well, tell me about it, instead of me getting in to search out the promises myself,
And it wasn't until you got in, then you began to see how they apply
Right.
to your life. 3, by learning to listen what a person is saying, and not saying without being threatened and so well defended that we cannot be an empathetic listener. As Khalil Gibran, Khalil, I think is Gibran says, all can hear, but only the sensitive can understand. When you're talking to someone that has a terminally ill person at home, it's real, it's genuine, and it means it's, your heart's reaching out. I said earlier when listening, until you're on the same wavelength with the person you're listening to, you're not listening. Until you feel what they feel, then listening hasn't begun. You're listening to symbols, but you don't have the touch up. And yet, when you get into really what is turning them on, someone says, I'm out of a job. Someone says, my husband's going to die. Someone says, I'm facing a serious operation. Whatever the fear may be, when you get to that point of how it would affect you, you feel that feeling. Then you're beginning to listen with an understanding. By helping, 4 says, by helping them to find ways to finish their unfinished business. Helping them to find ways. First, there is unfinished business, but helping them to find it. Okay, there's things you should be doing. I guess this could also be considered, Lila, with the people who are relatives of the terminally ill. The things you should be doing to help them finish their business. Okay, it's going to happen. Let's go. Let's not just everybody hide and say, okay, well, let's not tell anybody. Let's not do anything. Let's just wait till it happens. Oh, how sad. So it's happening. It's there. We'll pray and we'll plan and go. But there's unfinished business. There's things to be done. Feel it, say it, talk about it, encourage it. Help them to find ways to finish their unfinished business. 5, and this is the key, by understanding the psychological stages of the dying and their families and knowing what is needed in each of these stages. Is anyone familiar with these 5 stages? A, B, C, and D. 4 stages. D. Anybody seen that before? These are the stages of the dying when someone is told they're going to die. First, they deny. You'll see denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. First, they deny. No, it cannot be me is a typical reaction when first learning about their illness. This functions as a buffer after unexpected, shocking news. This is a defense that must be respected until a person is ready and able to mobilize other less radical defenses and can begin to talk about his illness. He's just found out he's terminally ill.
And some people never get beyond the
Some of them
stage.
never get back. Don't talk
See,
about it.
that's the thing.
I'm not
Some
going to
of
tell
them,
my wife.
They can
I'm
stop
not
at any stage, and they stay there until they do die. You know, that's again, if that's the only thing they can handle, then you have to allow them that. You know, to yank them from here to there, it can't be done.
Right.
Yeah.
B, anger. Why me? How come it's me all the time? Everything happens to me. Feelings of anger, rage, envy, and resentment expressed. It is important to allow, and you can underscore this word ventilate. It's important to allow a person to ventilate without taking it personally and remembering that you are not the target. The most rejecting and manipulating people are the most lonely. Why me? And boy, this is the one that rebel against God. I hate God. This is the time at this particular stage you'll get them ranting and raving. They don't want anything to do with churches. They don't want anything to do with Christians. They don't want anything to do with people that are of the Lord. They're rebelling at this particular point. Let them. It's important that they ventilate. Get it out. Because then you're going to pray with them. But don't give them that you shouldn't feel this way or you shouldn't say that. He is just coming off denial and he's angry now. He doesn't know why his life's cut down. He says, I'm here, I've got terminal cancer, and I've got 6 kids. You want to explain to me why? Let it come. Let it come. Anger. C, bargaining, an attempt to postpone one's death. Promises are made to God which cannot usually be kept, creating irrational fears or wish for punishment because of excessive guilt. It's important to allow the person to talk in order to be relieved of such fears and guilt. Bargaining. I'll do anything. So that's 3rd stage. 4th stage is depression. There's 2 parts to this, reactive and preparatory. Reactive usually accompanied by guilt and shame, loss of self-image, possessions, job. You need to help the person to alleviate some of the unrealistic guilt and shame and support the person's self-esteem. There's a need to strengthen his vital forces by supporting his sense of identity at this point. Preparatory, which accompanies preparatory grief, loss of everyone and everything he loves. This preparatory depression is needed to prepare the person for his final separation from the world. Important to just allow the person to talk without trying to cheer him up and telling him not to be sad. Talk about it. You get people saying, well, I'm going to die. You know, okay, let's talk about it. This is in preparation. He's reached the 4th stage. He's coming through a depression, and finally he hits acceptance. And this is the final stage that is reached of the person where a person has been able to work out the feelings associated with the other stages. It is not necessarily a happy time because it is usually devoid of feelings. The final rest before the long journeys. Family of dying persons need more help and understanding than the patient at this particular point. Finding acceptance. Okay, I'm going to set it up A lot of what Gene is doing now, going to school, and I heard Jeff Riddle say, Eleanor, his wife, he's in the same business I am. Something he did with Eleanor, and I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm teaching my wife to be a widow. Okay, there are preparations you make and things that you do, you know, that the Lord may call me home and this girl has to move from that point on. So you don't wait until the act to make decisions or to take actions. As Jeff says, I'm preparing my wife to be a widow. Okay, I'm preparing Jean to be a widow. Should I get called home first? And we talk in this sense that there's a need to discuss this. It's a very distinct possibility. And it's not one you can hide under the chair, push it up, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. It can and does occur in many families. Acceptance. At the bottom of page 17, these stages were set forth by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross as a way to understand what happens to people who are dying. However, she emphasizes that they are not to be taken literally, since no one dies in exactly this order. Some people bypass 1 or 2 stages. Some never get out of the first stage, and others may be experiencing 2 stages simultaneously. Family members also experience these stages, but again, they are not necessarily in the same stage as the dying person at any given time.
And that adds to the conflict,
Right.
you know, and the problems of talking to people that someone is dying, and perhaps the one who is dying has reached the acceptance stage, and the person who's caring for them and dealing with it is maybe in anger or bargaining, you know, and it becomes quite complicated. That's why the thing of counseling with people is not easy. Because, you know, sometimes there is no happy ending, and that's the thing. You know, the happy ending is in the Lord. It's as Irene's saying, you know, with talking to people, if we have to do it in the guidelines of contact, and we can get them to talk about the Lord, it's easier for us. Ones don't want to mention it, you know, then we just have to do other means.
I think this is where the philosophy of death, I walk today, I don't know how many more years the Lord's going to give me, but I walk with a sense of awareness that there are opportunities each day, and I'm responsible for those opportunities. And however He's going to do it, whenever the day comes, that the call comes, it's a case of making use of each day. And the frame of reference with death is one of, I'm moving toward it. He's using you and I to touch the lives of others in our lifespan right now. We're all at various age levels. Now, I might have 1 year, I might have 20. You might have 1 year, you might have 20. It's important to consider who we belong to and where we're walking in the frame of reference of death or dying. Because in a strict sense of the word, we're offered up like sheep in the gospel. We're set up to die any day or every day for whatever the cause may be. This is a philosophy that comes with knowing we're walking with Jesus Christ. So death isn't something that you just say, well, I've got to prepare for it. It's there. To the Christian, the minute you accept Jesus Christ, it's just a matter of time. He's walking in this body. He's walking in your body. And He's going to use you for whatever time's necessary, and then we'll get the call. 6. By keeping alive whatever pleasures are accessible to the dying is very, very important. And one of these pleasures may be talking to someone in contact. I think that's a little bit of a promotion thing in there myself. But what contact is saying here is there's a telephone number for a person who has a problem where they might want to talk at 2 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Family member may not be home, and they just feel the need to
Have
talk.
any of you had this experience of someone calling that's ill, calling you on the phone, and not knowing what to say to them? Have any of you dealt with that?
Death and dying,
Yes,
yeah.
you. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. No, I just wondered if you've had this experience of someone calling and just saying, well, knowing their circumstances. Just wondered if any of you had the experience.
7 says, and these these last two belong to you. By asking yourself, what are your gut reactions when talking to a dying person? Because that is what they will pick up. They won't pick up your words. They'll pick up the way you act. They'll know how you feel. It's the same thing as to an alcoholic, whether you care or condemn. They'll pick it up. And a dying person will pick up the same thing. So by asking yourself, what do you really feel like? Do you believe it? Or is it just something you'd like to believe? Well, if you don't believe it, you're going to have to work on it. Ask the Lord for the power and the presence to come with it to give you that assurance. So when you're talking with someone, you've got that feeling, okay? But they can check. They can detect that gut feeling that you just don't want to talk about. You're uncomfortable. It's the way you react to them, and you back off from them. 8, by being comfortable with being instead of feeling, that you have to actively be doing something. Listen, listen, listen. And of course, that's for the telephone caller. So that's Death and Dying. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And if there's a book out on this that has a number of other, of course, this is just a synopsis of the 5 stages. But I'll give you something interesting. I didn't bring the book in. Consider this, if you will. These are the steps to dying. And John Powell said, these are also the steps to living. The death to self. Take a look at those 5 stages and think of the death of self. How many are afraid for death of self? Total absolute surrender. Okay, look at the 5 steps you got to go through. John Powell says these are the steps for the dying, but they're also the steps for living. Are you prepared? This is what we do when we begin to die. Our death of self begins. We deny it. No, it cannot be me. We go through a series of anger. We bargain. We go into a depression and finally accept it. In other words, what John Powell says is we don't accept Jesus Christ all at one time. We bargain. Because it doesn't come. First we deny, I know when I started my walk with Christ, I said, I'm not ready for this. I got a lot of living to do, and there's a lot of fun left. I'm not, but it was coming too heavy. I was getting too much of a hammer thrown at me, and I just couldn't put it down. So I denied it. No. Why should this happen to me? And then the anger, because of the fact that I was going to lose all this. Then I began to bargain. Well, maybe I'll do it part-time. I don't want to be a full-time Christian. That's a little heavy. Maybe I can get on Saturday, Sunday, and then maybe Monday through Friday I can still do some of the things I used to do. And then you begin to think, okay, this is it. This apparently what John Powell's talking about is the transition from life to death. This is what I mentioned to you earlier, I think a week or 2 ago. I said Jack Van Horn's in the process of dying of self. The more that dies of me, the more I find myself caring and giving to others, and less of feeding me or my ego or my needs, in the sense that there was, okay, I'll take this time and go read a book, or I'll go to a ball game, or I'll go to movies or something like that. I'm getting more involved with contact. I'm getting more involved in this area with Jesus Focus. I'm down at church. We're doing different things. But the thing I'm getting involved in more than anything else is with people. And I never had time for people before, other than a professional or business approach. As long as it was a professional contact, okay, that meant I get something out of it. So what John Powell says is take a look at these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps to dying, and think of them in terms of the steps that you're going to have to walk in the total, absolute surrender toward Jesus Christ. And you're going to go through each one of them. I guarantee you. Even to the point of depression. Because when you wipe out the fact that the world, with all its glitter and glamour and everything else, there's a beginning of a depression point, because this is the transition period. You walk into Jesus, and I think as you've already found, all of us have, as we walk in, he supplants what we found in the world. He gives us in the peace that passes all understanding. He gives us something that's beyond it. But we don't see that at the beginning. So there are distinctive steps to consider. And you might be saying this also. Use these same 5 steps when you're counseling with people who want a spiritual healing. But they might have to go through these steps. Death of self. That you're going to bargain, that you're going to get angry, that you're going to deny, and you're going to get depressed. Then ultimately you're going to turn around and accept. But there are distinctive steps that you take. And I thought that interesting. Kubler-Ross, of course, coming from counseling with terminally ill people. Powell, also with terminally ill at times, but basically he's teaching of finding yourself using transactional analysis, finding where you are and how you feel about things. What love is doing, love is being there. Love is an activity, not a feeling. These are all new. This scrapped a lot of old things that I've been hanging on to for a long time. Gives me a whole new insight as to just exactly what I'm expected to do. I don't have to wait for the will of God. In a lot of instances, it's already there. It's just waiting for me. I'm the one holding it up. Any thoughts, questions, comments?
Jack, what you were saying about these steps gives me an insight into maybe some of my own attitudes. Until recent years, I used to be kind of hold back, people that were dying or something, you couldn't get me to visit them for anything. And yet, in recent years, we're put in a position where I've been able to minister to people like that. Where before I couldn't have done it, I couldn't handle it. And it's just a change within me that I could handle it. Because certainly, the change, and I see here the steps that actually, I have gone through.
I was
Still
embarrassed.
I'm going.
Yeah, I was embarrassed. I talked to somebody that was dying, and I was embarrassed because it was almost the feeling, well, better
feel
you
like
than
an
me.
intruder.
Yeah, I'm an intruder. You're going to have to die, and gee, I'm glad it's you and not me. And there were a number of things going through my mind. This isn't what the guy needed. He had X number of days left on his calendar, and what he needed was somebody that could understand and somebody that would talk. Somebody that would let him talk. That he didn't all of a sudden contract leprosy, they were shirking him, they were hiding things from him, rejecting me. He had things to do, he had unfinished business, and nobody was going around and helping him finish his unfinished business. He was put in a room and said, okay, go off and die, like an elephant. Don't they go off somewhere and die here?
There's one of the points that the author, I don't know if it was Ross or who it was, but one of the big points I made is that the people who are dying want to talk about it, and nobody wants to talk to them about it.
Yeah.
They're embarrassed. They're afraid.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they don't know
what to
where.
say.
They really don't know what to say.
That's it.
And this is where I think Kubler-Ross really brings this out. This was an area when we had our training. These 5 girls testified about the death in their families, and all the time they were testifying down there the night we were in training, there were tears flowing like you wouldn't believe. That they had the stages. I'm not sure which stage they had stopped, but a number of them had only gotten halfway through. And so this opening up maybe put them to the next stage and ultimately to acceptance. And one of them who did not accept was Iris Cutler, who was the Jewish girl we were talking to last night. And she said for 2 years she lost her brother. And she just would not accept the fact that her brother was dead. This was a younger brother, I guess. And she finally went to a friend who was a Christian psychiatrist, and they had invited him especially to help her because she was really getting coiled up tight and wasn't going to be too long before she was gone. And so Alan was her brother's name, and she walked into this guy and she says, hello, Dr. So-and-so, and he says, Iris, have you said goodbye to Alan? And she said, I felt like I was hit with a 2x4. Have you said goodbye to Alan yet? She says, no, I'm not going to say goodbye to Alan. He says, that's where you're hung up. He says, you've got to say goodbye. He's gone. But you haven't said goodbye yet.
There was a party, who was it? His son, 17 years old, died, and the mother's keeping the room exactly the way it was. She's driving the other brother.
Denial.
Oldest
insane.
They haven't said goodbye.
Yeah.
They haven't gone through the...
Denial.
That's denial. She hasn't even got out of the first stage yet. He's not dead. I'm going to keep it here. He'll come home soon. Yeah, did this in World War II when people were killed. They kept the room. Oh, Charlie's room's up there just the way he left it.
They still wear black and everything.
It's not living. That's
Not
right.
living.
You're
It's
just
not.
existing.
And
You're not
imagine
living
what
at all.
that's doing to the family of someone, because the brother or sister who is alive rejected completely. They might as well be dead too, because Mama and Papa have not accepted.
And she's really using it as a crutch for sympathy. And everybody
Yes,
says, reach
can
out
be
to
that.
her,
Right.
feel sorry.
And as long as they do, it's supported. Goes back to what we were talking
It's
about
very
before.
sad.
Yes.
When you need
There's a
to
lot
bring
of
them
lives
beyond
that are
this, you know,
involved.
when are you going to say goodbye? Because that took Iris out of the denial stage. She said, when I said goodbye, Alan, she said she must have cried for 3 days. It just poured out, just poured out. And finally she accepted. But it took a push.
That's 2 years after the funeral.
Say goodbye to Alan.
It's interesting, but, and this is the important thing that you are able to talk about it, because this is what you could be doing to help someone else. So, have a prayer?
Yeah, we're going to talk about loneliness and marriage the next time we meet. And that'll give us time for, we'll see with Richard how maybe he can get in here for communion or we can have communion together. But any thoughts, comments, everybody? Oh Lord, how I thank you and praise you for the words and the symbols and the meaning and the understanding. We can do absolutely nothing without you, Father. You are the glory and the honor and the victory and the majesty. And we thank you for bringing us together and opening our hearts and our minds, for giving me the words, Lord, and the love that just moves back and forth in this room. How I praise you and thank you for Jesus Focus. How I praise you and thank you for the love of these people who came out each Sunday for the seminar and for the learning that you've given us to share with each other. We ask your blessings on Richard and Betty and on the Jesus Focus Ministry and all the Bible study groups, and that we can use this, Lord, to help others to find you, to find themselves, and then in turn find you, because half the hang-ups of people we counsel is searching for themselves. Bless this group, Father. May the blood of your precious Son cover them on their trip home, cover their homes and their lives, till we meet again. Thank you, praise you. Keep us, strengthen us, and guide us. In the precious name and authority of your Son, our living, loving Savior, Jesus the Christ of Nazareth. And everybody say, Amen. Thank you.